It has been commissioned as part of Dada Fest International 2020. My name is Paula Garfield, and I'm the Artistic Director of Definitely Theatre. I feel very honoured to have been invited to host this evening's event. It's to be in this event. I'm going to also describe myself. Hair that I'm red lipstick up the top, and then I have a plain background behind me. I'm joined tonight by two interpreters. The first one is Jackie Beckford. She has her hair in long wonder locks. She's wearing a dark top with a green background. Also, Martin Fox Roberts, who's wearing a plain dark shirt with a plain background. Both of them will be voicing over for me tonight. You'll notice that they will take turns in voicing over, and there'll be turn taken, so they'll pop up on screen. So this, as I said before, is the 7th annual Rushton Social Justice Lecture. And it's very special. It's the International Day of Disabled People. And that's why this event was chosen to be broadcast on the 3rd of December. So we are delighted to have Deborah Williams with us tonight, who is going to deliver her lecture. And she will be exploring the language of disability, exploring and examining how the language and its associated interpretations impact disabled people, self-define on the perception of disabled people within society. Once Deborah has finished her lecture, I will pop up again because there will be a short break. And after the break, we will be joined by Ono Dafejaye, who is from Heart and Soul. We shall also be joined by a second person, Marie Tidball, who is a research associate in law at Wadham College, Oxford. And we will further explore issues raised for those of you who have joined us here in the lecture webinar. There will be an opportunity to ask questions at the end of the panel discussion. Should you need captions, if you look at the bottom of your screen, you will see there's a strap line and it's got an opportunity for you to press the closed captions. If you look down, you'll see 2 C's. And if you want to say anything, please put it into the chat box. But just to let you know, everybody will be able to see that. Next to that, there'll be a Q&A where you can put your questions, type your questions in. Those are closed, so they're not for the public. Only myself, Ono, Deborah, and Marie will see those questions, of some of whom we will select to discuss further on in the event. So we will try our very best, of course, to answer all of the questions, but we have to be very careful and monitor the time. So we will select as many as we can. If for any reason you disconnect from the webinar using the same link, do try and reconnect. All of the questions will be moderated. So now I would like to welcome Deborah, who is going to give her talk. I'm going to leave, but I shall be watching, and I will pop up again later on for my own questions that I have for Deborah. Welcome, Deborah.
Hello, Paula. Thank you. And thank you all for joining us tonight and joining me tonight. I've set a timer and I'm going to try and stick to what I've actually written, but don't hold me to that. So my name is Deborah Williams. I am the Executive Director of the Creative Diversity Network. That is my day job. By night, I am an artist, a writer, performer, director, and actor. I worked in theatre for several years and now work in television, trying to fix all the issues around disability in television. So as you can imagine, it's a very simple, easy job, and I will be done within the next 3 or 4 weeks. And then I'll be looking for a new job. So, you know, describe myself. I am a black woman, about 5'6", despite what other people say. I have black and grey at the front. I am wearing a black top with blue trousers and black shoes. I am sitting in a studio theatre space, which is a black box. So it's black all around me. I have a music stand, a table, a computer, my script, which is in paper, an iPad, and some pens, and a mask on the table. I'm pretending that I am a lecturer and that I know what I'm talking about. With that, I welcome you all to the language of disability. Attraction, sexual identity, value, pity, pleasure, betrayal, justice, imitation, limits, sign, rights, history, technology, work, power, evolution, mainstream, social, confirm, cultural capital, cancel, back to the start, reduced to access, gratitude, conclusion, charity, self-identity, privilege, prejudice, validation, refusal, us, we, denial, doubt, oppression, permission, nonsense, history, tick away, clock, thinking, sharing, doing, together, nothing about us without us, direct action, network, people, love, passion, children, understanding, we are all in this together, leadership, praise, power, position, counterculture. Now is the time for us. Other, in charge, the we in the world, shared experience, capable, competent, powerful, intelligent, leading, front, not back. They are some of the words that came to mind when I started to sit down and think about this lecture. I have framed this as a formal lecture being given by a visiting professor. So here is my abstract for the language of disability. In this lecture, I will discuss the history and contemporary understanding of language in relation to disability. This is a very European, UK idea and premise, so may be different to international colleagues who are listening. I will seek to share my thinking as to how language has become a barrier when it initially started as an empowerment tool, as an activism tool, and as a way of identifying self. I will also focus on this from the cultural, creative perspective, that of the artist as leader, the artist as champion, and the artist as activist. We will explore the idea of social justice intersections, interconnectedness, and disability from a cultural perspective. I will look at the last 30 years, and this will be about a personal experience, an exploration of a personal experience. More than anything, it will seek to challenge current millennial understanding of disability appropriation within the disability arts sector and offer a call to action for the 21st century. In the beginning, there was charity. There was a medical model, there was a pity model, upon which disability and disabled people were anointed by their contemporaries who were non-disabled and who felt that virtue signalling was the most credible approach, and there was a lack of understanding, I believe, about the offer disabled people made to society and to creative discourse. There was little to no understanding of cultural capital of disabled people. Hence, language was used as a stick to beat us with. What I have witnessed and what the research I have done shows is that we got to the first level of success and stopped. I will share 3 sections that I believe we broke into and that have been the guide for what we know today and feed the disconnection that is driving our demise. But first of all, let's go back a little bit to where words come from and how we found ourselves in this predicament. All of the words I started this lecture with were part of what makes up the dictionary. If you're a Blackadder fan, you'll know that it was all Robbie Coltrane, Dr. Johnson's fault. If we are to lay the blame anywhere, as he is the one that left the first draft, well-researched and peer-reviewed dictionary where Rowan Atkinson, Blackadder, and Tony Robinson, Baldrick, could get access to it. And they duly destroyed it. So, having burnt it, they had to start all over again, making up not just the words, but also the meanings. And we find ourselves here now in the 21st century. We're stuck with this rigid process that does not allow us to be free thinkers and gets me into trouble every time I speak good old Anglo-Saxon. So how does it work? Somewhere there's a set of guidelines that some disabled people meet. These disabled people are palatable, they are acceptable, they are mediocre. They're close to their peers in the dominant group, sometimes without even knowing. Their unconscious bias could do with a little bit of dusting off, I suspect. But there are also those who know and make the most of it. The evidence is clearly visible in the majority of the work that has been created over the past 25 years under Disability Arts banner, and that sits in this space. To put it bluntly, it's easy to sell to the mainstream audience, who are disgusted or offended by seeing something on a stage, in a gallery, or at a festival that is more than one step away from the worlds they inhabit and they are familiar with. The commissioners and producers who are looking at international markets and trying to ensure that export meets the standard of the centuries and decades of propaganda about being British and being English and what England is. The artists that just want to make work. For them, there is no politics required. These are deemed successful. They are the ones that non-disableds find easiest to steal and poach and take as their own. They can and do then change the language of independence to that of oppression because it sounds better. It's easy. Those words that work, they will do, and of course, they can be assimilated. The next section are the people and the work that is not so tidy. Not so easy to segment and package and sell. For want of a better word, it's the work that is likely to be intersectional. It's work speaking to race, racism, to multiple oppressions, to digging deep into the past lives of disabled people and how they worked to challenge the barriers and the boundaries that they were forced to live within. The less typical and close and less close to normal you were, the less likely you were to be supported by a funder, to be sought out for collaborations, and ultimately to be celebrated and championed as a credible export for culture and creativity from the UK. This work is more likely to be of a better quality, as more time and analysis has been involved in its creation. As the groups making this work are the most marginalised and oppressed within the communities of disability. Henceforth, the requirement for consideration and well-being is built in. They are also less likely to be making work for others to enjoy, and are more likely to be making work that they enjoy, that they believe in, and they see as part of the activism history and future of disability arts. Without making this work would not be able to function and to be the valuable human beings that they are. The final group and section I want to share with you today and talk about are those who were activists and open about politics. They were the leaders, the ones who came up with the first phase of language of disability, the models, the activism, the critical discourse. Ironically, even, they, more than any others, were closest to being considered normal. Educated, male, white, middle class. But for the wheelchair use here and there, they were just like the upper tier of normalcy that leads not just in the UK or in the creative industries, but across the world. But I would suggest, and the evidence leads me to believe, that they were not creatives for life. They did not seek or wish for a future making art, being artist. More critical discourse focused on what was said and trying to fold the language into what was already there, what was already taking place, what was already in existence. For want of a better word, mainstreaming. They did all the hard lifting, though. They found the histories and the past that were buried and ignored. They led by example by losing their careers and ultimately being left behind once their work was deemed accepted and made acceptable and palatable by the first group I mentioned. Nothing about us without us. Here is where I suspect I will draw attention, shall we say. Because I believe that those who got through forgot to look behind them. It was meant to come through with them. For who else was there? The us was interpreted as being a very narrow definition, not dissimilar to the one that existed in mainstream, that everybody had spent so much time fighting against. There was no sense of solidarity and unity. Research also suggests, though, that it wasn't deliberate. It was very much privilege-based. The model, I would attest, instead of being the social model, was actually the model of Eve. For those of you who don't know, Eve was the young, passionate, naive actress in the 1950 movie release All About Eve, starring Anne Baxter and Bette Davis. Margot, the character played by Bette Davis, was nurturing and supporting the young Eve. All the while, Eve had her own agenda. Ultimately, it led to her taking the role Margot was destined to play, becoming a hit on Broadway, and then the path for her future was clear and she made her way to Hollywood. Margot was left exactly where she started and disappeared into the world of understudies and incidental actresses. Like Margot, I don't believe any of us saw this coming. No one was aware enough to plan for sustainability of the movement, of the culture, of the next wave of creatives, indeed, of the language. It ended up becoming a benign gene pool that was willing to throw away the consensus that had been hard fought for under the social justice banner, the self-identification, the respect for each other, the us. It was painful to witness and to experience. To this day, not just me, but many others are picking up the pieces from that fallout. To have to explain to one marginalized group that appropriation of another oppressed group's experience was unacceptable, when you speak about why identity in terms of race and ethnicity is something that cannot be discarded because a new term comes along and sounds better. The building stopped. Bang in the middle of the most important phase. We stopped. We forgot who we were and what we were trying to achieve. The fallout became more and more solidified as the money drew up. Definitions lost priority over, ironically, survival of the fittest. Invariably, the fittest were those closest to the world notion of normal: straight, white, male, educated, with the only abnormality being a wheelchair or a visible difference in terms of less upper or lower limbs than the usual. That loss of the collective, the loss of the unified voice, gave space for non-dispers to slip in. They were able to step in and convince all sides they were there to support them, help them get where they needed to go, not as a group, but as segments, on a personal basis. The basis that could and would allow them to progress career opportunities above others. Therein lies the rub. Once that rot had set in, there was no way back. We are now living this, suffering as a result of these Now, don't get me wrong, this isn't an attack on any one person or persons. It's not about envy or jealousy. It's about regret. The regret that the momentum we had, that gave us legislation, support systems, creative capital, it halted. Just like that. Mourning for the life we were meant to have lived, experienced, and enjoyed together as community. It felt like the end of that perfect relationship where that person was the one. But suddenly they start ghosting you, and before you know it, you start to question if any of it was ever real or true. Did we imagine it? Did I imagine it? Over time, this separation left holes that led to what I think is safe to call betrayal. It opened us up to the worst of society. Politicians. We lost everything that had been fought for. One support system of social security. The support system of social security, gone. The freedom afforded by independence, gone. The creative capital of activism, gone. Worst of all, the strength, confidence, and courage through language, our language, gone. We are now in the year of pandemic, and the vulnerable and undeserving scroungers, we are reduced to access if someone chooses to allow us to be. The evidence suggests that if we allow things to go on as they have been and do not make an intervention, there will be no way back for us. This is the position as I see it, and as the evidence points me towards. If any one of the three groups that I have mentioned are allowed to consider themselves the gatekeepers of our language, our words, our story, our creativity, and that group is monocultural in its thinking, its education, its experience, and its understanding, then we will always be fighting for position, ignoring our unified capital and not seeking the future we have earned and we deserve. We will just continue to have this very sad and depressing conversation amongst ourselves over and over and over again. In conclusion, this is a depressing place to be in the 21st century. I'm not going to deny it. It's not where I'd imagined the future to be. It was not meant to be like this for us. We are very much in dark, dark times. But through darkness, we have to find optimism. The three parts laid out and analysed are clear and distinct in their own rights. They all have value and talk to their own audiences. To be clear, these are the most popular in the research I have undertaken. I have seen others, but they are either lacking in critical mass or outside of my area of expertise. In particular, the deaf community's experience and understanding and use of language. Specifically here, I speak of British Sign Language. I have therefore chosen not to include them in this specific lecture. However, it does not mean that they do not have credibility or are not viable. And I hope that someone very soon will pick up the baton. For us all, I say that there is no good in isolation. There is nothing that comes from it except for divide and rule. We have been apart for too long. And now is the time to come back together and find a new grouping, a new understanding of us, our language, our capital, and our dignity. It's clear that we are an add-on in the world, and the job of creatives and the culture is to reflect the world back to itself. It is in all its dirtiness or glory. Without activism, there is no justice. Without justice, there is no culture. Without culture, there is no us. This is what my research tells me. Social justice, creative authorship, and human rights are interconnected. They are fundamental rights. This is the optimism I see, and it's the only way out from the place we find ourselves, right here, right now. Reconnect, reimagine, and reclaim. If we don't do it, and if we don't do it now, it will be everything about us without us. Thank you all very much indeed for hopefully staying the course. That is the end of my lecture, The Language of Disability. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope it's given you a bit of food for thought. Paula is due back shortly, I believe. I hope you're all enjoying your wine, your chocolate, and your cheese. Once again, thank you very much indeed.
Wow, Deborah, wow. You're absolutely right. Everything you spoke of, I believe, is absolutely right. We have to work together, because only by doing so can we challenge and fight. I was born deaf. The audiologist and the teacher for the deaf advised my parents, who knew nothing about deafness because they'd never met a deaf adult or child. They said, "Oh, your baby is deaf. We're very sorry. You're going to have to teach your child to speak in order for them to fit into society." And my parents, of course, in the 1960s and 70s, they accepted that. I was born in 1967, so now you all know how old I am. So that was what they were told. And now my mother, who's 83, she says, "Paula, looking back, I just wished that those audiologists and doctors had given me other options. For example, teaching sign language or teaching speech and sign. There was no other option. They were all hearing people, like you said, the gatekeepers, Deborah, like you said, they were white, male, well-educated, the thinkers of the time. They thought they knew what was best for deaf people. In fact, they were wrong. Deaf people know what is best for deaf people because we have the lived experience. I've got 2 children. They are deaf and I'm deaf. I know what's best for my deaf children, not the gatekeepers. They're interfering. I say away with them. I thought your presentation should be on an international platform, Deborah. I think you need to take it internationally because it is a breakthrough. You know, teaching for deaf people, training teachers of the deaf and audiologists. Maybe we should go jointly and do something together to make them stand up and take note.
I'm up for that, Paula. Absolutely. Thank you very much. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Yes, absolutely. It was a very impassioned speech. I can remember in the 1970s, the word handicapped was used. And people weren't, the sign for handicap was really negative. It's this. And, you know, I wondered, why did they sign that? Like it was somebody falling off the edge of a cliff. You know, I thought, what about people that are visually impaired or people that are wheelchair users? So that sign did not encompass everyone. And then that changed in the 80s to D for disability, denoting many people. So the many people, the differences amongst them. So that sign evolved in the 1980s. So it's really interesting that the deaf community, who have been fighting avidly to be seen as deaf and disabled, feeling the need to be expressed as a linguistic minority. But my question is for you, Deborah. Disabled, you know, there is LGBTQI, which is an umbrella term for a group of people. It's a capitalization system. Do you think that we need new language and new terms? Just my thoughts out there for you. What do you think?
I think it would. I mean, I agree with you fundamentally. That's actually the main issue for me is for us as community to own our language and to define how we are referred to, how we are how our work is referred to, and because, you know, as a Black person, the term BAME is used. I've never used it in my life, but apparently I am of that group, but I don't know what that group is because that doesn't mean anything to me. I'm Black, always have been, always will be. End of conversation. So if we can find a way, that would be one of the ways for, as you say, for people who are deaf, who also identify as being disabled, for us to come together and have a better understanding and have ownership over that capitalization, and what that means, and then how that can then travel, because I also think about how that travels globally and how that travels internationally, because I think of the disabled people I've worked with, you know, on the African continent, in North America, in Latin America, in Australia and Australasia, in East Asia and Malaysia, and a capitalization term that would have that give us global grounding, really identify with each other, as opposed to constantly having to change our language when we're working with Americans or when we're working with Australians. I think that would help us, and it would give us much more critical mass and much more power against people who then come along and try and pick us off bit by bit and say, oh, you know, I've decided that if I refer to you as this, you accept it, or you don't get any money, or you don't get through the door, or you don't get into the room to have the conversations that really matter.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that. We do need to create something that we feel can unify us and that we all identify with. That's very important. I can't remember, about 20 or 30 years ago, I was told that someone had decided there should be a big D and a small d. And it was a hearing person that suddenly decided that. The big D denoted people that were born deaf, grew up using sign language, had deaf family members, went to a deaf school, went to deaf club, worked in a deaf environment. And small d meant perhaps they'd become deafened later on in life. They hadn't used sign language, they were oral, they mixed with hearing society, they worked with hearing people, they had no deaf friends. I thought that was awful because that was about divide and rule. And now I keep telling everyone, look, if I see somebody using big D, small d, I'm saying, don't use that sign. We're all deaf. That's it. You know, you're deaf or you're hard of hearing, but they simplify it. They put people in different groups and different categories, but it doesn't work like that. You know, some people are born hearing and later on become deafened and decide to learn sign language. Maybe they work with a deaf organization. So are they a big D or small d? What category do they fit into? The politics is nonsense.
I mean, sorry. I'm inclined to agree. And I didn't know it was a hearing person that came up with that. So I have used it because I thought it came from the deaf community. But and it's also part of why I didn't do talk about it in my lecture today, because it's not something that I'm clear about in terms of ownership and authorship. And I couldn't find anything when I was looking for it as to what it was. I do think a lot of that's a classic of dividing us and trying to rule. And I think we have to fight back. You know, we cannot let this continue the way it has. We cannot allow people, because that's what we're doing. We're allowing non-disabled people to tell us who we are and to shape our identity and to explain to us and steal from us our creativity. And that's not allowed. You know, I'm not one for comparing in terms of race and disability, because I live in both spaces. I live in that interconnected space. But my experience as a Black person within the disability community has been awful. My experience as a disabled person within the Black community has been awful. So I live in the grey area. Everything I do is in the grey area. And I quite like inhabiting that. And I like to create my work and to do the work that I do. You know, my day job is all in the grey area. And I think people find that way too challenging to deal with because I'm not binary. You know, let's talk about gender. I'm non-binary in that respect. I live in grey area. I work in the grey area. I build business and entrepreneurship and ambition and lead my team in the grey area. And that is what frightens people the most. So actually, that is my power, my superpower. That is all of our superpowers as disabled people. And that is what we should lean into much more than trying to fit into this nonsensical space that they're telling us we need to fit into. That is disappearing from our very eyes. Disappearing from our very, very eyes. And we'd worked hard, and the third group of people I spoke about, the activists, worked hard to break that circle and to break that notion of normal, of mainstream, all of that up. And here we are 30, 40 years later, kowtowing to it and to them, and allowing that to allowing it to lead us by the nose into our futures, which is off the edge of a cliff. We don't have a future if we continue to do this. We're going to drop off the edge of a cliff, because when they're done with us, they will discard us and throw us away.
Can't hear you.
Sorry, Martin, you're on mute.
Sorry, that's my fault. Paula was just saying, this is my favourite colour, which is grey, and you were talking about the grey areas, and that's my favourite colour. So everyone, has got to be brave, and everyone's different and unique, and we've got to celebrate that. We can't categorise people just to feel safe. We've got to get into those grey areas. We're passionate people. We've got to go with our instincts and fight and campaign. So now it's 7:45. We've got a couple of questions. Maybe we could pick 2 questions before we finish for a break. It's just gone 7:45. So what do you think, Deborah?
Shall we take the break until 8 o'clock and then come back at 8 o'clock?
Yes. So yes, I think that's what we'll do. So in that break, we'll have a look at some questions. So you can all have a break, come back at 8 o'clock. And thank you again, Deborah, for your wonderful lecture. So 8 o'clock it is.
Thank you, Paula.
Or 8:05?
No, 8.
8 o'clock. Okay. We'll
See
come
you
back
at 8
at 8
o'clock.
o'clock. We'll see you all then. Bye.
8. Bye.
Paula's just saying hi. Can we start? Okay, is everyone back now? Do you want to just put your hands up just to check we're back? So, yeah, great. So I'd just like to welcome to Honor Dafajaya. She's a member of the Heart and Soul Theatre Company, the award-winning theatre company. And also welcome to Dr. Marie Tadball. She's the director and coordinator, Oxford University Disability Law Policy Project. So over to Honor and Marie to introduce yourselves. Who would like to go first? Who would like to go first there?
I'm happy to go first if that's okay with Ono.
Yeah.
Are you sure? Okay, thank you. So I'm Dr. Marie Tidball. I'm the founding director of the Oxford University Disability Law and Policy Project. I would probably describe myself as an academic activist. I think we were asked to give a description of ourselves and the background. So I have blonde hair and I'm wearing a black and white top. There is a plant next to me in the picture, which has some Christmas lights. So we have some festive cheer in the background.
My name is Ono, and I'm the taking part assistant for Heart and Soul, and I'm wearing a purple coat, black boots, a black top, and a red cardigan.
Right. So, Dr. Marie, do you want to just talk for about 5 to 7 minutes?
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. So thanks so much for having me, and I was really blown away by Deborah's brilliant lecture, and really agree that we have seen this shift in the use of language about disability and disabled people, and that has a really important impact on how they see themselves and how they're perceived in society. But it also has a huge impact in how their behaviour and their conduct is governed, and their access to the law. So Foucault has developed the concept of dividing practices, which recognises that how individuals and groups are categorised, so what language we used to describe that category, determines how they and their conduct is governed. And this is an issue that I look at a lot in my research on people with autism, learning disabilities and mental health problems, and particularly how when they come into contact with the criminal justice system. So I'm going to just talk briefly today about the problematic concept of vulnerability that we have seen increase in popularity, both in the use in certain pieces of legislation largely, which I might add has come after the Equality Act, which uses the term disability to describe a protected characteristic which allows people to have legal protection from the anti-discrimination provisions in the Equality Act, but instead uses this term of vulnerability. And there's an important divergence between the conceptualization of groups as vulnerable versus being disabled. And like Deborah, I'm going to go back to some of the roots of the language and what it means and why it's really really problematic. But just before I do, I'll just mention specifically, we see the increase of this term vulnerability in the liaison and diversion agenda around how people with autism and learning disabilities and mental health problems should be treated in the criminal justice system. But more recently, we've also seen the use of the clinically extremely vulnerable in the context of the Coronavirus Act 2020, and that's had a huge impact on the experience of people with disabilities in accessing services and support throughout this pandemic. So just going back a step then, the etymological origin of the term vulnerability derives from vulner or vulnus, which is the Latin, denoting that a person is either being a risk or at risk. The former connotation derives from the Latin root of wrong, implying that people deemed to be vulnerable have an impaired ability to defend themselves with the judicial process or pursue their own best interests. The related connotation derives from the Latin root vulnus, meaning injury, associated with disadvantage, and the vulnerable being susceptible to discrimination, misunderstanding, and miscommunication. So it's a really problematic concept, and Stanford has argued that concept has led to people being constructed in moral identities which reflect both their innocence, being vulnerable at risk, and their culpability as being dangerous or a risk. And this labeling exercise is really problematic because it doesn't take account of the complex nature of people's individuality, and it fractures that identity and individuality across several categories. And there may be some positive intent behind providing the label of vulnerable for these groups and groups of people with disabilities. Intended to try and help people better access services which they would otherwise struggle to do. But I argue that actually it is better carried out, and access to those services and the protection of their rights is much better carried out through the language of disability, and that there's a normative argument and a descriptive argument for saying why we should describe people as disabled as the social model or the human rights model would do so, and not under a vulnerabilities framework. And there's a number of reasons for that. So not only do we see that when the language of vulnerability is used, that it perpetuates the difficulty in the criminal justice context with people, defendants with different disabilities, and actually accessing reasonable adjustments in that context. And it makes individuals, the police, and I'm giving the example of the criminal justice context here, but the police and other decision makers, to forget that actually that person, whether it's a person with autism or a learning disability, has a protected characteristic of disability under the Equality Act. And that means that there leads to an abrogation of responsibility towards that person accessing their rights. It also sustains the dominance of the medical model of disability, which is something that Deborah spoke about in her presentation. And it hides the social model of disability and its importance to us and our rights and our understanding of ourselves. And the social model importantly makes that distinction between the impairment, which is the condition of the mind or the body.
Can I come in? That it's a really poor sound quality. I think either someone's covering the microphone or typing away at something, and it's interfering with the sound.
Oh, right. Okay. My apologies. I don't know why that is. I wasn't doing either. So is that better?
No, it's not really better. No.
Can I move forward? Is that better?
That's better. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'm too far away then. That's why. Sorry about that. So I argue then that actually this concept of vulnerability, which has increased in dominance, particularly over the last year in its use in the Coronavirus Act 2020, hides the relevance of the social model and its importance to our identities. And the social model is embedded in the Equality Act 2010 and also in the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And that model makes a distinction between impairment, which is a condition of the mind or body, and disablement, a form of disadvantage or restriction of activity caused by the failure to take account of such impairment. And as disability activists argue, that failure leads...
I'm really sorry to interrupt. The sound quality is really poor.
Can you still hear me? Can you hear me now? Is that better?
When you come forward, I can hear you so much.
Okay, I'm gonna lean as far forward as I can. Can you hear me now?
Yes, that's good.
Okay, great. So that failure leads to barriers to participation in mainstream social activities, which are imposed on top of that impairment. And it's been argued that that shift of the social model in international legislation, in the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability, which, by the way, does use the term disabled on people with disability, that comprehensively and emphatically views persons with disabilities as subjects with rights rather than objects of charity and medical treatment. And then we've also seen develop over the last few years the human rights model of disability, which focuses on dignity and the inherent value of people, placing the individual at the centre stage in all decisions affecting him or her. And most importantly, it locates the main problem outside the person and in society. So I argue then that disability is a term that we should bring back to the fore, and Deborah and Paula are both looking at a way of uniting disabled people, and I think it is again around the term of disability. The UN CRPD is an international piece of legislation, and it's really important that actually we look at how better that could be included in our own legal system and strengthen that in the UK. One of the other things that Deborah mentioned, I'll just finish shortly, was the issue around intersectionality and the barriers to disabled people being seen from an intersectional perspective. And one of the things that I wanted to flag, that this position hasn't been helped in the context of law, because the Equality Act under Section 14 restricts claims being brought by people under the Act. And it prevents a claim of direct and indirect discrimination being combined in one ground, and it restricts applicants to two grounds where only a combination of two relevant protected characteristics can be included. So when I was pregnant, for example, if I was to bring such a case, I would have had to have chosen whether I was a disabled woman or a disabled person who was pregnant. I wouldn't be able to bring all of those characteristics that were intersecting in my own body and the way that I was experiencing the world in law. And that this was a compromise that was made when the Equality Act was being developed, because of opposition from the business lobby, who opposed any provision on multiple discrimination as being unnecessarily burdensome. So I think in order to actually do justice to intersectionality, we have to revisit the law in this area to make sure that people can bring claims of discrimination on the basis of multiple discrimination, so that the law better sees their dimensions of identity than it does currently. And one final point to end on. Deborah talked about sustainability and activism. And one of the ways I think that has been such a challenge to our activism over the last 10 years has been the gradual erosion of our rights through those hard-fought rights that Deborah talked about, through austerity. And what we have seen, though, during coronavirus is actually disabled people coming together because they're able to more easily organize online and actually begin to challenge some of the really difficult issues that now face us and come up with the solutions. But we need the government to listen to us, and we really need at this difficult time an inclusive response and recovery to the pandemic. And at the heart of that is bringing back the concept of disability and ensuring that the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities is properly applied in our legal system. Thank you.
Thank you ever so much for that. Absolutely, the coronavirus pandemic has disproportionately affected deaf and disabled people. I don't know if you're aware about hashtag where is the interpreter? Because every time there's been a ministerial briefing regarding coronavirus where Boris Johnson addresses the nation. There has been no interpreter at the briefings. And so deaf people miss out on access to information and have to wait for much later on for captions to be provided. And for those deaf people whose primary language is BSL and don't use English as a first language, they have had to rely on Scotland or Wales for the interpreter at those briefings. America have also provided interpreters for their briefings. So in England, we are well behind everybody else. And so I think, well, where are our human rights in that respect? So if you want to ask questions, audience members, please do put it in the Q&A. We welcome your questions. Please get them coming. I'm going to now pass over to Ono. Ono, would you like to maybe respond a little bit to what Marie has said, or do you want to talk about heart and soul? What would you like to do?
Yeah, I would like to talk about heart and soul. Heart and soul. They as soon as they found out that that lockdown was going to happen, they came up with a system to contact all of their participants on a regular basis, so that they wouldn't feel lonely. And then they came up with a system of how to move all the work that they do online. And it was a slow and steady process. And as well, I would like to add as well that when people with a disability want to apply for funding, they the applications are not made in accessible language. And so the system is set up. So the system is set up for people that don't have a disability. And example was when me and my friend applied for funding to start up our own company. There was quite a lot of barriers, like navigating the benefit system, because there isn't enough information out there on how to have your own company and to navigate the benefit system. And I totally agree with what Deborah said, and because there needs to be change, and that language needs to change, because disability because everyone that has a disability doesn't fit into the same box.
That's marvelous. Thank you for that, Ona. I have questions that I would like to ask you, linked to what you've said.
Yes.
So the application, like you said, for funding, my English is not a very sophisticated level.
Yeah.
So I rely on sign language interpreters to support me to translate and understand what those application forms are asking for. So I totally agree with you. So, Ono, do you feel that society is better now and that things have improved for people with a learning disability compared to 30 years ago?
No, because there's still quite a lot of barriers, like people not believing that people not believing that that people who have a disability can do stuff, and there has been change, like the program the last leg, because the program is presented by two disabled people, and it shows that people people that have a disability can make a meaningful contribution to society.
Yes, you're absolutely right. That is right. They can. And so we need more disabled representation in theatre and in broadcast, because they are going to be the role models. So I've got another question here, which I'm going to pose to Dr. Marie Tidbell. Do you feel that there needs to be more representation amongst lawyers? Do you think it's important, especially when working with deaf and disabled clients? I mean, how many are there in the UK who are deaf and disabled? Do you think there's enough diverse representation?
Absolutely, I agree that we need to have much more representation in the legal profession of people with disabilities. Whilst about 19% of the working age population has a disability, only around 11 to 13% of solicitors have a disability, and only 4% of barristers have a disability. And in fact, there's no data at all on the number of judges with a disability. Why does it matter? It matters because the lawyers represent our experiences, they fight our cases in the legal system, and they need to be able to critically understand how to interpret the law. And having the lived experience of disability and understanding the disability rights movement, the history of disabled people, is hugely important in really properly understanding how that law should be applied and interpreted. Similarly, judges play a hugely important role in the legal system, and to have limited understanding of disability or the lived experience of disability has a real impact on how decisions are made and how the law is interpreted. And in turn, that really matters because that has an impact on how the law develops over a longer period of time, and may even impact on the way that the law is reformed by the government. So absolutely, we need more lawyers with disabilities.
So the more deaf and disabled lawyers there are in the future, they can inform policy making and they can inform decision making, and they in turn will ensure that the law best meets the needs of deaf and disabled people.
Yeah, absolutely. And taking an example of the prosthetic limb, we had a moot, which is a mock court case competition at Oxford University a couple of weeks ago, that looked about whether an artificial leg should be seen to be part of the body for the purpose of the criminal law. So could people commit crime against the person if they kicked or damaged someone's prosthetic limb, for example? And actually, the most nuanced arguments and the discussion that comes from having had a lived experience of disability. Often we've seen in legal cases describe a prosthesis as a type of clothing, or comparing it to a type of clothing, and it's something quite different. And prostheses can be functional, of course they can, but they can also be a really important part of our embodiment and the way that we perceive ourselves and our bodies. So it's for the law potentially to only see a prosthetic limb as property, as something belonging to someone, and therefore damage that being damage to property rather than to some kind of harm to our bodies, can be really problematic. And it's only with more lawyers and more academics with disabilities that bring that insight of the lived experience, that bring that critical analysis from the perspective of the disabled people's movement, that we have this innovation and better understanding of the law and how it should be applied. But not only that, what areas of the law are missing? So in my view, we need to see much more discussion, for example, in terms of the future of disability rights, around things like maternity care pathways for women with disabilities. When I had my baby and I was pregnant, I was shocked by the lack of specific advice for disabled mothers with disabilities, whether that was around the kind of aids and assistance and accessible clothing I might need in order to look after my baby and in order to breastfeed, or whether that was actually having sufficiently accessible hospital rooms when I was in hospital to have her, and also thinking about my birth plan and what was going to be a safe way for me to give birth. And then a final example I give is on environmental sustainability. We see that there are both tensions and opportunities for disabled people around going to zero carbon and in dealing with climate change, but there are challenges, whether that's types of transport that you've got a motability car, but that motability car may not be an electric for a really long time because they're really expensive and motability might not apply those. And so areas which look at various measures on restricting certain car emissions also need to understand how that might affect disabled road users.
Absolutely pertinent points, and even more reason why there should be deaf and disabled people involved in the law and the lawmaking. I think every area needs to be covered. So I just wanted to add, you mentioned obviously there's a need for more deaf and disabled people, but what about juries? There's a jury of 12. We know that's standard and traditional, but deaf people aren't currently allowed to serve on juries because they say there's complications over interpreters. So deaf people aren't allowed to serve on juries and therefore aren't allowed to contribute to that area of society. So it's ridiculous.
Yeah,
we could talk about this all evening, but I realize that it's 8:30. And therefore, I've got to take some of the questions we've received from the audience members. I think the questions are for Deborah's lecture in the first instance, or perhaps Ono or Marie can respond. But the first question is, so we feel isolated. Disabled people and deaf people feel isolated at the moment. How do we overcome and come together So really, the social model, because we don't want to have division. So how do we come together to create a stronger movement? I'm going to hand over.
I would say that, I mean, it's a part of why I agreed to do this lecture. I think it's critical that there is an acknowledgement of the isolation that we feel as deaf and disabled people within the current circumstances. That's the first thing, and that hasn't really been acknowledged and hasn't really been placed front and center. I would also say, I mean, I didn't. It took me 8.5 months to finally have my coronavirus meltdown, where I just went, this is too much. It's too much for me now. I cannot cope. I had for 8 months been pretending that everything was fine, and trying to just live with it and go, oh yeah, it'll, you know, it's just for a short period of time. So I think that's the first thing that we need to do. We also need, you know, people in positions of power, disabled and deaf people in positions of power and who have ability to influence and have means of production should also, I think, should also be open dooring. So, which is the policy that I have. So anybody can email me, anybody and anyone can contact me, and as much as I can and as often as I can, I offer support. So that is either my individual support at the end of a phone, or a Zoom meeting, or a coffee. People, you know, people all over, and actually, a lot of non-disabled people are contacting me and asking me for support, much more than disabled and deaf people. So I think the other bit is to reach out to people, and to say, have you got, you know, can we Zoom? Can we talk? Some disabled people have actually done that for me as well, actually, more so than the other way around. Quite a few people have sort of offered me help and support for my day-to-day, because I don't have, I can't leave my house apart from today, to do basic things like shopping and the necessity. So things like that, people have offered me and given me support. So the least I can do is, when I'm in my house, is to be able to offer that, you know, pay that forward and offer it. But I think at the moment is take each day as it comes, and start thinking about what the future might be, and how the future might be that we come back together, and the division that is the false division that's been created between us, we will be able to work at removing. And we've got time to do that. There is no rush for that. We have time to do that over the next year, I would say. We have the time to do that. So I would start planning, plotting, and thinking about how we're going to come back together, and what you bring and what you need for when we do come back together.
Thank you. Thank you, Deborah. Anna, do you want to make a response at all, or Dr. Marie?
Yeah, I'm happy to come in unless Ono wants to.
Basically, it comes down to as well not being afraid to ask for help.
Should I come in too?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think that the question was about how we can come together and what can we do. So what Deborah said about acknowledging that we need a period of recovery, and that actually the last 8-9 months has been really hard, I think is absolutely the right thing. And we're all probably a bit exhausted. But I think the first step is to choose an area where you really feel passionate about change. And it might be a small thing. It might be it might be about getting your local authority to raise the flag for International Day of People with Disabilities every year, and writing to your local councillor and say, I want this group of people and this group of people living in this city or town to be acknowledged by you raising a flag on your public building to symbolize that. I say this because we did the very thing in Oxford this week, and I'm really proud that we did. Or it might well be that actually it's a much bigger thing, that you want to change the law in some way. And so one example that I argue for a lot, and I've written blogs on this, is the need for the Equality Act to be reformed, Section 104 of the Equality Act to be reformed, so that we can have all disability shortlists. And that means that there can be shortlists in general elections and in local elections, which allow more disabled people to stand to be elected. Currently, the law only allows for all women's shortlists. And to have a change like that, you would need to maybe write to your local MP and ask them to maybe ask a parliamentary question of government to say, when the disability unit of government is reviewing a disability strategy, as it is next year, could they look at changing the law in this way so that we can increase the opportunity for more disabled people to be elected to parliament and to government? Because really there won't, the tenet "nothing about us without us" won't happen until we have more disabled people at the decision-making table. So start small, but start with a change that really matters to you. And as Deborah said, reach out to other disabled people, and that can happen very slowly, and it doesn't have to take huge amounts of time. But joining events like this and finding out about other disabled people who are working in this space, and contact them and be in touch, and that network just begins to grow and grow.
Yeah, absolutely right. And it's really important to remind people today, this is the National Day of Disability. So we should be proud and of our, the activist kind of work that we've been doing. So just now, if anybody has any more questions that they would like to ask, now's the time to do that. We've got plenty of time, so you can be asking questions from the audience, and we'll translate those questions as well. So, okay. If I don't understand, if you don't understand, please ask me to repeat. So how can disability and arts communities support each other in a creative way? And who wants to be involved in the mainstream? Who want to be involved in the mainstream?
Sorry, could you repeat the question, please?
Yeah. So how do you think disability arts community can support both disabled creatives and who want to be included in the mainstream, for those who want to celebrate, like being in the grey, for example? Can we do both, or do we think it's better to serve ourselves and humanity by focusing on the grey area? Who'd like to answer that question? Who'd like to come in there?
I'm more than happy to answer that question.
Yes, of course, Deborah, come on.
I think, well, first of all, I think we shouldn't have to choose, right? A long time ago, I was in a meeting, a very, very long time ago, years ago, where Bonnie Greer was talking about Black people and this idea of the mainstream. And she said very clearly, we are the mainstream. And the fact that we continue to seek to be a part of something we are already part of is a part of the destruction that is happening. We are the mainstream. When we look at when we look at programs that are now subtitled, that have audio description, when we look at the opening ceremony for the Paralympics, when we look at a UK broadcaster celebrating the fact that they are the not the Olympics broadcaster, the Paralympic broadcaster. When all of these things are happening, we are the mainstream. That is because of us. Yeah. And we need to own that much more than we do, which I believe would then mean that you can move wherever you want to as an artist. You can make something that is really niche and specific living in your grey area that you like, and that is, you know, whether you call it a passion project or something that is really close to your heart. And then you can skip across the other side or move somewhere else and create a full-blown shiny floor Saturday night show for, you know, ITV or the BBC, or put on a show at the National Theatre, a musical or a comedy, or as artists, we inhabit any space, and we should be able to claim and inhabit any space we want to. I think as deaf and disabled people, we have been taught that that we have to separate. And that is what I'm trying to get at, is that we don't. No other artists have to do that. But we as deaf forced to do that. We cannot be our full selves. And, you know, one of the mottos that people float around at the moment within the diversity space is, you know, bringing your whole self to work. Which, as you know, as a Black disabled woman, I'm never allowed to bring my full self to work. It's not allowed. You know, the nonsense that comes with me turning up as my full self is not worth my energy. So I think it's a false dichotomy that we need to spend, that people who are influencers, who work in politics, who work in law, who especially in the creative industries are sought out to be advisors and advocates and champions. They really need to put their foot down and go, nah, this isn't real, this isn't true, and I'm not engaging with it. I do not accept the premise of your argument. But that's just me.
And it comes down to as well, when people with a disability need to keep on knocking on the door, because if we don't, change won't happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Dr. Marie, would you like to add anything there at all?
Yeah, well, I've just been reflecting what others have been saying, and I think something that I would love to see is a resurgence in public art that represents disability and disabled people. The one piece of art that really just changed my life was Alison Lapper's statue that was on the 4th plinth of Trafalgar Square of her pregnant. And that was the first time I'd ever seen a body like mine represented in a public space. And it was so moving. I think I must have been maybe in my late teens when I got to see it in real life, and was just totally moved by it. So more art that reflects the bodies of disabled people in public spaces. And also, you know, more done by disabled artists to record the incredible disabled activists that we have in this country and around the world. If people haven't seen it, Riva Lira's Circle Stories is just an incredible collection of paintings of a group of disabled activists that are utterly beautiful in my view. But actually there's very limited work that certainly I've seen in recent times of current activists that are in this country. And I think that would be wonderful to record that as part of our history, and as part of the legacy of a group of people that have helped to sustain us. And you know, art is one way of sustaining us and sustaining the things that we've been fighting for, just reflecting back on what Deborah said in her talk. So I think that two thoughts for me: more public art reflecting disability, and more disabled activists depicted in art. Oh yes, sure. You're challenging me now. So I think it's R-I-V-A, Riva, and then the surname is Lira, which I think is L-E-H-R-E-R. That's right. I think so, yeah.
So with all kinds of media, it's a really powerful tool to show our legacy, to carry on with that activism, and to place our passions, especially in this time where we are suffering from the depression. And it's like when I was 18, I'd never seen deaf actors on the stage before. I'd only seen people in the deaf club. And then performing. And then before that, I had no idea about theatre. It was just hearing people mumbling away, and I couldn't access theatre. And then seeing deaf actors, for me, it was just mind-blowing. It had a massive impact. And I thought, that's what I want to do. It's like the same as what you were saying, Dr. Marie. It was like, seeing the statue in your late teens and that impact that had and how that influenced as well. We need more representation of that, and more role modeling as well. We need to carry on all of that.
Okay, so we're just changing interpreters now. So there's another question. Should we focus upon the grey area and better serve ourselves as humans? I'm not sure if I understand that question.
I think it means, should we be selfish?
Right, that's it. You've got it. You're right. Yes, I think we should. Absolutely. Oh no. Do you want to respond to the question? Somebody in the audience asked, should we focus on what we want to do in theatre or the arts?
Yes, because then we can start making changes, and then people slowly people will come and see disabled work.
So Heart and Soul, it's really empowering for you to be a part of Heart and Soul, right? Because you're able to express yourself through dance, movement and singing.
Yeah.
That changes people's perception after seeing the performances that Heart and Soul do, right?
Yeah, yes, it does, because it shows that that people who have a learning disability or a disability can do a wide range of things, and it shows as well that they don't only want to work in supermarkets or shops.
You are right. I agree wholeheartedly with that. Absolutely. Yes, we can do better than that, stacking shelves, and yeah, you're absolutely right.
Brilliant. Sorry, I'm so sorry. That's just made me laugh so much, because that is the stereotype of people who are learning disabled and have learning disabilities, is you see them wearing, boiler suits in supermarkets, stacking shelves. and pushing trolleys about with big labels on them, so people can read their names, and they are, it's such a terrible stereotype. And they're asexual beings. They have there's no personalities. There's no second or third dimension to them. And especially especially in television and in theatre, in the arts, that representation needs to be demolished. Never mind changed, it just needs to be completely demolished, because it's not true. And it's perpetuated a terrible myth around what it means to be learning disabled and have a learning disability, let alone I mean, look, when I was 18, 19, and I tried to get a job stacking shelves in Tesco, I was told I couldn't. So it's factually incorrect as well. So apart from anything else, it shouldn't be allowed.
Thanks for that. Yeah, I have really enjoyed talking to the three of you. You've been amazing. You are phenomenal women. Yes, woman power, phenomenal. Right, so I have to thank you for your time, for being part of the panel. Thank Dada Fest for organising this. But we do have to end soon. We have a 2-minute film that we want to show by Nikki Wadden, creative advisor for this festival this year. So, audience members, can I ask you to please remain and watch the film? So yeah, if you sit back and just watch the film. Thank you, and we'll turn our videos off.
I'm a white... Hello, it's me again, Nikki Mars Weldon, creative advisor for this year's Dada Fest. I'm a white woman, I'm wearing brown rimmed glasses, I've got bleached white short hair, bit fuzzy on top today, I'm wearing a grey hoodie. Behind me is the back of my black office chair and some white bookshelves with loads of books on that I haven't read. This is the end of the live events at Dada Fest Translations 2020. It's been a great festival, and a big well done to Rachel, Richard, Joe and all the team in swiftly creating such a great online festival. Now you can go and get some rest. It's been a joy to see all the work commissioned, the work being made by deaf and disabled artists, from the panel discussions, the podcasts and much, much more. Even though we haven't had the chance to all be together in Liverpool, it has definitely felt like we have all connected. The artworks are going to be available to watch online until 13th of December. You can catch them on the Dada Fest website. There's more information on what's coming up as well on the new Dada Fest Coming Soon page. Have a look, it's quite exciting. Also, have to say a big thank you to all the interpreters, translators, describers and access workers who have worked so hard and so fast and been so accommodating at the swift turnaround of work. So thank you all very much. Now this is never the end. We will keep making, we will keep creating, because we have to keep our voices out there. So stay safe, stay well, and here's to hopefully seeing you in person in 2021.